English Podcast Hub. Hey everyone, welcome back to English Podcast Hub. I'm Mia, and I'm here with Mark. So, Mark, I had the most interesting conversation with one of our listeners yesterday, and it completely inspired today's episode.
Oh, I'm curious. What happened?
She sent me a message saying, Mia, I've been learning English for 5 years, but I still feel like a beginner. I can understand podcasts and read books, but when I try to speak, I panic. I think my English is terrible. And Mark, here's the thing. Her message was written in absolutely perfect English. Every sentence was clear, natural, and grammatically correct.
Oh, wow. That's such a common situation. She's proving her own point wrong without even realizing it, isn't she? She's literally demonstrating good English skills while claiming she doesn't have them.
Exactly. And this is what we're talking about today. Why your English is probably much better than you think it is, and why so many learners completely underestimate their own abilities. Because I have a feeling that many of you listening right now are in the exact same position as this listener.
I think you're absolutely right. And this is something I see constantly, not just with English learners, but with people learning any skill. There's this huge gap between how good someone actually is and how good they think they are.
Yes. And what's fascinating is that this gap often gets wider the more you learn. Beginners sometimes think they're doing great because they don't know what they don't know yet. But intermediate and advanced learners often feel terrible about their skills because they're aware of so much more.
That's such an important point. So the more you learn, the more critical you become of yourself, even though you're actually getting better. That seems backwards, doesn't it?
It does seem backwards, but it makes sense when you think about it. When you're a beginner, you might learn 50 words and think, great, I know English now. But when you're intermediate, you've learned 3,000 words and you're thinking, but there are thousands more I don't know. I'm so far behind.
So it's like the more you climb the mountain, the more you can see how much mountain is left to climb. But you're forgetting to look down and see how far you've already come.
Perfect analogy. And today we want to help our listeners look down that mountain and realize just how far they've climbed. Because I genuinely believe that most people listening to this podcast right now have much better English than they give themselves credit for.
Okay, so let's break this down. Why do you think English learners underestimate themselves so much? What's causing this disconnect between their actual ability and their perceived ability?
There are several reasons, but I think the biggest one is what psychologists call the fluency illusion. When you're listening to native speakers or advanced learners, it seems so effortless to them. They speak quickly, they use idioms, they don't pause to think. And you compare yourself to that standard.
Right, so you're comparing your behind the scenes struggle to everyone else's highlight reel, as they say on social media. You're comparing your internal experience, which includes all your doubts and hesitations, to other people's polished external performance.
Exactly. But here's what you don't see. Native speakers also pause, also search for words, also make mistakes. We just don't notice it as much because it's our native language. And advanced learners, they've had years of practice and they still have moments of uncertainty.
So the standard you're comparing yourself to isn't even realistic. It's like comparing your everyday look to someone's Instagram photos with perfect lighting and filters.
Great comparison. And there's another big reason people underestimate their English. They focus on what they can't do instead of what they can do. They think about the conversation where they couldn't find the right word instead of the 10 conversations where they communicated perfectly well.
Oh, that's so true. It's like negativity bias in psychology, right? We remember the failures much more vividly than the successes because our brains are wired to focus on problems and threats.
Exactly. Your brain is trying to protect you by making you remember the mistakes so you can avoid them in the future. But the side effect is that you end up with a completely distorted view of your actual abilities because you're only remembering the bad moments.
So, if I understand correctly, someone could have 30 successful English interactions and one awkward moment, but they'll go home thinking, my English is terrible, because that one awkward moment is what sticks in their mind.
Precisely. And here's something else that's really important. Many learners have unrealistic standards for what good English means. They think they need to sound exactly like a native speaker with zero accent and perfect grammar to be considered good.
But that's not realistic at all. I mean, think about it. Native speakers from different regions don't even sound like each other. Someone from Texas doesn't sound like someone from London, who doesn't sound like someone from Sydney. Why should learners try to sound like one specific type of native speaker?
Thank you. This is such an important point. There's no single correct English. There are many Englishes, and as long as you can communicate clearly and be understood, your English is good. You don't need to sound like you were born in California or London.
And honestly, having an accent isn't a weakness, it's part of your identity. It shows you speak multiple languages, which is actually impressive. Most native English speakers only speak one language.
Absolutely. But the pressure to sound perfect makes so many learners feel inadequate. They hear themselves speak and think, I have an accent, therefore my English is bad. But that's not logical at all.
Right. So let's talk about some concrete ways people can recognize that their English is actually better than they think. What are some signs that someone has good English, even if they don't feel confident about it?
Great question. Here's the first big sign. If you can understand this podcast right now without subtitles and you're following our conversation naturally, your listening comprehension is already quite advanced. It's not beginner level at all.
That's such a good point because people take their listening ability for granted. They think, well, I can understand, but I can't speak, so my English is bad. But understanding natural conversation at normal speed is actually a huge achievement.
Huge. Do you know how much your brain is doing right now while you listen? You're processing pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, context, tone, and meaning all simultaneously and in real time. That's incredibly complex cognitive work.
And you're doing it automatically without conscious effort. That means those skills are deeply integrated into your brain. You're not translating word by word anymore. You're thinking in English.
Exactly. Which brings me to another sign. If you ever find yourself thinking in English, even just occasionally, that's proof that your brain has internalized the language. You're not just memorizing rules anymore. The language is becoming part of how you process the world.
I love that. What about reading? What are the signs someone is a good reader in English?
If you can read an article or a book without looking up every other word, you're doing well. Sure, you might encounter unfamiliar words, but if you can understand the main ideas and follow the story or argument, that's advanced reading comprehension.
And here's something people don't realize. Even native speakers encounter unfamiliar words when reading. I read regularly, and I still come across words I don't know, especially in specialized or academic texts. That's normal, and it doesn't mean your English is bad.
Great point. And speaking of vocabulary, here's another sign your English is better than you think. If you can express the same idea in multiple ways when you don't know a specific word, that's actually a very advanced skill.
Oh, I like this one. Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you can't remember the word refrigerator. If you can say the cold box where we keep food or the machine that keeps food fresh, you're demonstrating flexible thinking and good communication skills. You're working around the gap in your vocabulary.
That's actually more impressive than just memorizing vocabulary because it shows you understand how the language works as a system. You're not just recalling words, you're constructing meaning.
Exactly. Native speakers do this all the time when they can't remember a word. We'll say things like, that thing you use to open cans, when we can't remember can opener. It's a natural communication strategy, not a weakness.
So, if someone is using circumlocution, talking around a word they don't know, that's actually a sign of competence, not incompetence. They're problem solving in real time.
Precisely. And here's another big one. If you can have casual conversations about everyday topics without major difficulty, your conversational English is functional. You might not feel fluent, but you're communicating successfully.
What counts as everyday topics, though? I think people might underestimate what they can actually discuss.
Good question. Everyday topics would be things like talking about your day, discussing your hobbies, making plans with friends, ordering at restaurants, asking for directions, talking about movies or books you like, sharing opinions about current events. Basically, the conversations that make up most of daily life.
So, if you can do those things, even with some mistakes or hesitations, you're actually at a pretty functional level of English. You can live your life in English, which is the whole point of learning a language.
Exactly. And this is where I want to challenge our listeners to reframe how they think about mistakes. Mistakes are not evidence that your English is bad. Mistakes are evidence that you're pushing yourself to try new things and taking risks with the language.
Oh, this is crucial. I think fear of mistakes is the number one thing that holds learners back and makes them underestimate themselves.
Absolutely. Think about it this way. If you're making mistakes, it means you're attempting things that are slightly beyond your current comfort zone. That's exactly how you improve. If you never made mistakes, it would mean you're only using language you're already completely comfortable with.
So, mistakes are actually a sign of progress, not failure. But I know that intellectually understanding this and emotionally accepting it are two different things. How can people become more comfortable with making mistakes?
That's a great question. I think the first step is recognizing that communication is about getting your message across, not about being perfect. If people understand you, Even if you made grammatical errors, the communication was successful.
Right. Perfect grammar with no communication is worse than imperfect grammar with clear communication.
Exactly. And here's something that might help. Think about conversations you've had with native speakers. When they made small mistakes, did you judge them harshly? Did you think they were stupid or incompetent?
Probably not. Most people are understanding and forgiving of small errors in conversation. We all make them.
Right. So why do we assume others are judging us harshly when we make mistakes? Most people are focused on what you're saying, not how you're saying it. They care about the content of your message, not whether you use the past perfect tense correctly.
That's really liberating when you think about it. The pressure we put on ourselves is usually much greater than any pressure coming from the people we're talking to.
Absolutely. And here's another way to recognize your progress. Think about what you couldn't do a year ago that you can do now. Can you understand more? Can you express more complex ideas? Can you watch shows without subtitles when you couldn't before?
That's a powerful exercise because it forces you to acknowledge concrete progress rather than focusing on some abstract ideal of perfection.
Yes, and I want to introduce a concept here that I think is really helpful, the idea of good enough. Your English doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be good enough for your purposes. If you can do what you need to do in English, then your English is good enough.
I love that. It's about functional ability rather than some impossible standard of perfection. So if you need English for traveling and you can successfully travel using English, your English is good enough. If you need English for work and you can do your job in English, your English is good enough.
Exactly. And here's something else. Your English is probably better than you think it is because you're probably comparing yourself to the wrong people. You're comparing yourself to native speakers who've been speaking English their entire lives, rather than comparing yourself to where you were when you started.
Right. A better comparison would be yourself 6 months ago or yourself a year ago. That's a fair comparison because you're measuring against your own starting point.
And when you make that comparison, most people will realize they've made significant progress. Maybe you can understand more vocabulary, maybe your pronunciation has improved, maybe you're more confident speaking. Those are all real achievements.
So it's about changing your frame of reference from external comparisons to internal growth, measuring against yourself rather than against others.
Exactly. And I want to talk about something that I think holds a lot of learners back. The idea that you need to wait until your English is good enough before you can use it, like you need to reach some threshold of competence before you're allowed to speak.
Oh, this is so common. People say things like, I'll start speaking when my English gets better. But the irony is that your English won't get better until you start speaking.
Exactly. It's a catch-22. You need practice to improve, but you don't feel good enough to practice, so you stay stuck in this waiting phase forever.
So what's the solution? How do people break out of that cycle?
The solution is to recognize that your English is already good enough to start using. It doesn't need to be perfect to be useful. Every conversation you have, even if it's awkward or full of mistakes, is valuable practice that's making you better.
So it's about shifting from a perfection mindset to a progress mindset, focusing on getting better rather than being perfect.
Yes, and here's a practical tip. Start noticing when your English works rather than when it doesn't. When you successfully order food in English, acknowledge that win. When someone understands your joke, celebrate that. When you understand a podcast episode, recognize that achievement.
So you're actively training your brain to notice success instead of only noticing failure. That's powerful because it rewires those negative thought patterns we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And over time, as you accumulate more evidence of your competence, you'll naturally start to see yourself as a capable English speaker rather than as someone whose English is inadequate.
I think this is such an important message. Your English is probably much better than you think it is. You're being too hard on yourself. You're focusing on what you can't do instead of what you can do. And you're comparing yourself to unrealistic standards.
Beautifully summarized. And I want to end with this thought. If you're listening to this podcast, if you understood our conversation today, if you're engaging with English content regularly, you're not a beginner anymore. You might not feel advanced, but you're definitely progressing well.
And the fact that you're still learning, still trying to improve, still pushing yourself, that's admirable. That shows dedication and commitment. Give yourself credit for that.
Absolutely. Your English journey is your own. It doesn't need to look like anyone else's journey. And you're doing better than you think. Trust yourself a little more.
Well said, Mia. I hope our listeners take this message to heart. You're probably your own harshest critic, and it's time to be a bit kinder to yourself.
And remember, every time you use English, listening, reading, speaking, writing, you're reinforcing those neural pathways. You're getting better even when it doesn't feel like it. Progress isn't always obvious in the moment, but it's happening.
That's a perfect place to wrap up. Thanks so much for listening to Easy English Conversation, everyone. Until next time, be kind to yourself and recognize how far you've come.
Yes, celebrate your progress and keep going. Your English is better than you think. See you next time.